Greetings, and welcome back to LA Quill, where we explore the hidden architecture of stories and the quiet forces that make fantasy worlds feel alive. Today we're talking about romance, not just as a subplot or a happily ever after flourish, but as something far more fundamental. We're exploring the idea that love itself is often an essential plot engine in fairy tales and fantasy, shaping events, motivating characters, and determining outcomes in ways that swords and spells alone never could. When many people hear the word romance in relation to fantasy, they immediately picture courtship and passion or destined lovers standing beneath a moonlit sky. But romance in fantasy is a lot broader than that. At its core, romance is about deep emotional bonds, attachment strong enough to compel characters to act when logic, safety, or self-interest would tell them to stop. In fairy tales especially, love is rarely ornamental. It's not there merely to soften the story. It's there to make the story happen at all. One of the most interesting things about fairy tales is how often love operates quietly, even invisibly, until its importance becomes undeniable. In many stories, love is not announced up front as a driving motivation. Instead, it reveals itself through persistence, sacrifice, and loyalty. Characters endure impossible tasks, repeated failures, and immense personal risk, not because they are brave by nature, but because love leaves them no alternative. Without that emotional force, the narrative simply collapses. Consider how often fairy tales revolve around characters who should, by all reasonable measures, give up. They are warned repeatedly. They fail tests. They are betrayed, misled, or placed under curses that stretch across years. And yet they continue. This is rarely because they are chasing glory. More often, they are chasing reunion, restoration, or redemption. Love, whether for a sibling, a parent, a child, or a beloved, creates narrative momentum that no prophecy alone can sustain. Platonic love is especially powerful in this regard. Modern audiences sometimes overlook it because it lacks the flash of romantic tension, but fairy tales treat familial and sibling bonds as forces of extraordinary strength. Love between siblings often explains why a character becomes a guide, a protector, or a persistent helper throughout a story. These characters do not seek recognition. They do not ask for reward. Their devotion exists because the bond itself demands action. From a storytelling perspective, this kind of love does something remarkable. It reframes sacrifice. When a character repeatedly helps another, even after being ignored or mistreated, the story invites us to look deeper than surface-level motivation. Love explains endurance in a way ambition cannot. It also allows fairy tales to resolve peacefully, because the goal was never domination or conquest, it was restoration. The story ends not when an enemy is destroyed, but when separation is healed. Sibling love, in particular, introduces moral clarity into fairy tales. These bonds tend to be uncomplicated by desire or power imbalances. They exist as emotional constraints in a chaotic world. When a character risks themselves for a sibling, readers instinctively understand the stakes. The story does not need to justify that risk. Love does the work. This makes such relationships ideal engines for fairy tale plots, which rely on emotional truth rather than realism. Sacrificial love is another recurring thread that shapes fantasy narratives. This is the love that accepts suffering as a necessary cost. Characters driven by sacrificial love do not seek martyrdom, but they accept it when it becomes the only path forward. In fairy tales and fantasy, sacrifice is rarely meaningless. It's transformative. The character who gives of themselves, sometimes physically or sometimes emotionally, well, they become the turning point of the story. What is particularly fascinating is how fairy tales often frame these sacrifices in intimate and even uncomfortable ways. Acts of love may blur boundaries, challenge norms, or place characters in vulnerable positions. These moments can feel intense or even unsettling, but they're rarely meant to arouse. Instead, they emphasize the depth of devotion involved. The closer the sacrifice cuts, the more clearly the story communicates that love, not force, is what holds real power. For writers, this is an important lesson. Love-driven moments resonate most when they cost something real. If a character risks nothing, love becomes decorative. But when love demands courage, pain, or humiliation, it gains narrative weight. Readers believe in the outcome because they have witnessed the price paid to achieve it. In fantasy, magic might bend reality, but love defines what is worth bending it for. Romantic love, of course, also plays a significant role in fantasy storytelling, though it functions a little differently. Romantic bonds tend to initiate stories rather than to sustain them. Lovers are separated by violence or misunderstanding or fate, and the story unfolds as they struggle to reunite. Here, love is often the spark that ignites conflict rather than the thread that resolves it. Romantic love in fairy tales frequently places characters at odds with the world around them. Families disapprove. Societies exile them. Laws or curses stand in their way. Love becomes rebellion against the established order. This is why romantic plots in fantasy often involve forests and exile or liminal spaces. The lovers must step outside society before they can reshape their place within it. Yet even in these stories, love is not merely emotional, it's active. Romantic devotion inspires bravery in characters who might otherwise remain passive. It allows them to confront threats that would be unthinkable alone. Importantly, love does not erase fear. Instead, it gives characters a reason to act despite their fear. That distinction is crucial for writers crafting believable emotional arcs. One of the most satisfying aspects of love-driven fantasy is how it enables reconciliation. Fairy tales are often mischaracterized as simplistic morality plays, but many of them hinge on revelation rather than punishment. Love allows truths to surface. Disguises fall away. Supposed villains are revealed as lost or wounded rather than evil. Without love motivating characters to seek understanding instead of revenge, these resolutions would feel unearned. For fantasy authors, this offers a powerful structural tool. Love can function as both motivation and solution. It propels characters into danger, and it provides the emotional logic for mercy, forgiveness, and restoration. When handled thoughtfully, love prevents endings from feeling arbitrary. The conclusion feels inevitable because it aligns with the emotional currents that have been present all along. Readers, too, instinctively recognize when love is essential rather than incidental. Stories where romance feels tacked on tend to resolve abruptly, often with declarations that feel disconnected from the plot. In contrast, stories where love shapes decisions from the beginning create endings that feel emotionally complete. The reader understands not just what happened, but why it had to happen that way. That is why love remains one of fantasy's most enduring tools. It bridges the gap between the extraordinary and the familiar. Dragons, curses, and enchanted forests may be far removed from everyday life, but love is not. It grounds the story in human experience. It reminds us that even in worlds ruled by magic, emotion still governs meaning. For aspiring and intermediate writers, the key takeaway is this: romance does not need to dominate your story to be essential to it. Love can operate in the background, shaping choices and sustaining hope. It can exist between siblings, friends, mentors, or lovers. What matters is not the form it takes, but the role it plays. If removing love from your story causes the plot to unravel, then you have done it right. As readers, recognizing this structure can deepen our appreciation of fairy tales and fantasy alike. These stories endure not because of their spectacle, but because they understand something fundamental about human nature. We are moved not by power, but by devotion, not by conquest, but by connection. Love gives fantasy its emotional truth, and without it, even the most dazzling worlds feel hollow. And that's our tale from L.A. Quill today. Let me know in the comments whether you think love works best as a quiet motivator or a central conflict in fantasy stories. Until next time, may your stories always be magical.